get started. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I think probably everyone knows me, but for those that don't, I'm Angie Jones, Director of the Family Business Center at the University of Toledo. And today we have a treat for all of our members, although I do think we opened this up. So we have some non-members online. A longtime center sponsor, Skylight Financial Group, has connected us and brought in Dr. Tom Deans for an interactive webinar where I'll be interviewing Dr. Deans. So you'll also have an opportunity to ask your questions at the end. So what you can do, as usual, you can open up the chat feature. I think just about everyone has used Zoom, but if not, if you hover over at the bottom, you can click on the chat and the chat box will show up. So if you have a question, which we'll reserve to the end, put it in the chat box or just flag us and say, hey, can you call on me when you're ready? I'd like to unmute and ask my question. That's fine too. And we will get started with a little bit about our guest. So Tom Deans is an intergenerational wealth expert and best-selling author of Every Family's Business, and Willing Wisdom. So the book that provided the framework for this discussion is Every Family's Business, and it is the best-selling family business book of all time and was selected by the New York Times as one of the top 10 books business owners should read. I read it. I actually was telling Tom that I read it by the pool in Florida on spring break. I thought it was fabulous. I've used some of his stories and some of his concepts as curriculum in my class, and my students, I think, enjoyed it and got a lot of value out of that as well. And his long-awaited sequel, Willing Wisdom, which I have not yet read that one yet, but I will. So hopefully I have another trip to Florida coming up soon for that. That was released to critical acclaim and is already a Globe and Mail and New York Times bestseller. So previously, Deans was CEO of a large multinational family business, has worked in government relations, has been the president of a railway, and Tom has been featured in numerous magazines and journals, including Profit, Money Sense, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times. So Tom is a frequent guest on CNBC, Moneyline, and BNN. Tom is a highly sought after international public speaker on succession planning, wealth management, and philanthropic giving. And with his family selling businesses for more than 100 million, you can prepare to unlearn everything you thought you knew about business succession planning. Right, so Deans earned his Ph.D. from the University of Warwick in England. And we're about to find out that his speeches aren't just about money and clever tax plans. I'm excited for that. They're about giving the audience the confidence and inspiration to view estate planning as a rare opportunity to transition wisdom to family.
On this call and I don't have any sound.
So okay, with that, we welcome Dr. Tom Deans and thank you for joining us today. So if we were all muted, we would all be clapping. We would have a round of applause. So I'll do it for everyone. Okay, so I think right now we can just dive right in. So I will start with my first question. That's okay. If we can, maybe I thought begin the interview by offering an overview of how business transitions are going today in a time where everything has been flipped upside down. Are business owners and their families in good shape?
It is a great place to start this conversation. So first of all, Angie, thank you for having me on. This is such an important subject at this moment in time. I mean, if someone had told us, 15 months ago that there's going to be this global crisis that would, in many, many cases, take the roof off a business model, really imperil family wealth, we would have thought, yeah, right. A lot of businesses have been, 30, 40, 50 years just moving along down the tracks, never seen anything like this. And it is such a great time to pause and reflect about just how much wealth destruction takes place and always has. And I just think so this pandemic has really amplified the very best about family businesses. Families are coming together, leaning in and working, maybe taking salary cuts, like working through this. But it is also amplified the cracks in family relationships, the difficulties that have always persisted in this really unique business organization. And so that's troubling. And so really, I think now is such a perfect time to have the conversation we're going to have today, because we knew coming into this pandemic that about 80% of business owners did not have a formal business succession plan. They had lots of ideas in their head, about who would get their business or how it would transition or when it would transition, but really never sat down, worked with their advisors to formalize those plans. And so I just think that today, more than any day in the history of time, this conversation is apropos. It is so urgently required. So I'm excited for what I know is going to be a fascinating conversation over the next 45 minutes. And yeah, let's dive in.
Yeah, and I love that word amplified. That is so true. I mean, it has amplified the best parts and it has amplified the worst parts. Okay, the title of this webinar is Transitioning Family Business Wealth. So you've been sharing like kind of opposite messages to business owners that we maybe typically hear and their families for more than a decade. What compelled you to write a different book with a different perspective on such an old topic?
Well, really, Angie, despite having a Ph.D., this is not an academic book. I have really written about running a family. I was CEO of our family business. In fact, my family business story starts 100 years ago. My great grandfather had a tire distribution business, and my grandfather worked alongside my great grandfather. He didn't love that business, so it was sold in the 1940s. My grandfather inherited. He had a university degree in chemistry. He started a chemical manufacturing business in his garage, and that business actually grew to be $100 million. My father worked in that business. Guess what? He didn't love it. That business was sold as well. My father inherits. He starts a plastics company in 1973. That's the business that I joined at the tender age of 37, ran that business for 8 years as CEO, and that's the business that we sold on February 8th, 2007. Angie, do you see a pattern in our family? I mean, other than the fact that we can't keep a job? We start them. We found these businesses. We're founders. We involve our kids. We scale them. But we have never, over the course of 4 businesses, given a business to our children for free. If our children don't want to risk their capital to buy those businesses at full market value, we don't get all weepy and just leave it to them in our estate for free. We sell them. And then we pass the wealth. So a lot of people, so that is a counterintuitive message, particularly in the family business world, where often the measure of success for a family business is measured in generations. But we know that only 30% of family businesses statistically survive to the second generation. And of that 30%, only 10% will survive to the third generation.
It was on the initial.
I think we have Joe's mic on. No? Okay, so stated differently, 10% of that 30% will make it to the third generation. So 3% of founders will actually see their business end up in the hands of their grandchildren. They're really tiny odds. And so when I'm sharing this counterintuitive, some would say thought-provoking, contrarian, some have even called it a controversial message about the importance of always selling a family business, selling it inside the family, selling it outside the family. I am completely agnostic. Where I really drive a stake in the ground in terms of my public speaking and in terms of my book is this idea that gifting is really at the heart of much of the family wealth destruction that's taking place. And we know that this is an enormously expensive and costly subject for business owners because 9 out of 10 firms in America are family owned and controlled. 35% of the S&P 500 are family owned and controlled. Like they are big companies, they're public companies, they're small, they're medium sized, they're single, no employees. These family businesses are everywhere. And I have to say that I broaden that definition of family ownership to include businesses where there are no employees that are related by blood or marriage in the business. Because in the event of death of the founder, those shares will often, via the estate, transition to a surviving spouse. So that they're a heartbeat away from being a traditional family business. So that it's a broad definition, but an important distinction to draw right at the outset. There's a lot of people who go, "Oh, this message doesn't apply to me." Business succession planning, family business succession planning exit planning doesn't apply to me. I'm not a family business. It's like, dude, yes, you are. Half of all business owners, we had this chat before we went live, half of all business owners in your state don't have a will. They don't have a will. So in the event of death, and I'm pretty sure that's going to happen to every business owner who's listening in today, that business is going somewhere. If there's no will, there is no one appointed as executor. There is no executor. So the state will appoint a public trustee to divide up that business according to the laws of intestacy in your state. And I can tell you right now, the family will be none too pleased. This subject is so important right now. Obviously, with the pandemic, we don't know if someone's going to end up on a ventilator or not. Certainly, many business owners have in your state. Some have died as a result of this. It is such a wake-up call to bring urgency to this issue. Obviously, lots of people are going to sail through this pandemic, and that is fantastic news. The good news is they should pay attention to the devastation that it has brought to so many balance sheets, to so many income statements. This is a moment to take this subject seriously. And the good news is it's not just about death and dying and a sad, morose subject. In fact, what I argue is that when business owners treat business succession planning seriously, they will actually end up running a vastly more profitable business today because they actually understand what buyers, whether it's a family member, key employee, outside buyer, competitor, whoever, private equity, whoever comes along and buys that business at fair market value is going to be really looking at purchasing the cash flow. So when business succession planning is done well, it's keeping that cash flow question really in focus and really designing and building a company today with your exit in mind, whether it's 1 month, 3 years, or 30 years down the road. These are really good habits to develop and good best practices to bring to the business. So it's an interesting time to be sharing this message.
Yeah, and I love that you say that, exit, you need to keep that in mind, that exit planning needs to be a habit. Because I've had a few people come to me after when we put the invitation out and say, I'm not selling my business. I don't, that's not in the near future, that this might not be the best use of my time. That's why I didn't register for it. And I'm like, no. You have to hear about these 12 questions, right? That you should be talking about every single year with your different generations. And that best practice is that you should run your business like it's for sale. So, and I can appreciate, and you can appreciate this in the book, you can tell that you've lived this, right? This isn't just theory. This is something that you've lived through. So,
well, Angie, if I could just add, I was actually buying shares in my father's plastics manufacturing business 7 years before I joined as an employee.
wow.
And every year I would continue to go to the bank, take on personal debt. But like I was risking capital to buy those shares. Then my father would issue a dividend and I would use that dividend stream to buy more shares. So he taught me this. He taught me how to buy the business. And then a couple of years into the business after risking capital for 5 years, he put me on the board of directors. Then 2 years later, he hired me as CEO. So think about it. I'm a shareholder first, a director second, an employee third. Like we do it all backwards. Like we are really keeping the equity in focus. The equity is there for me if I want to risk something and to continue to own that business. And I can tell you, the reason we sold is we got an unsolicited offer. So we pivoted. It was a fantastic offer. So we pivoted. So there's a lot of family businesses that never are prepared to sell to a third party, even if they're contemplating an internal transition, because they're locked in on that singular transition plan. And in many cases, they're really leaving a lot of money on the table. There are people outside the family that are going to pay extraordinary multiples because they really want what you've built.
Yeah. And you were maybe prepared to look at that offer because you went through these 12 questions. And what I love about them is it forces you to talk about things that either are uncomfortable maybe to talk about or to bring up, or things that you just don't know that you should be talking about every year. So can we dive in a little deeper to those questions and maybe give us an overview of them?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, we don't have time to go through all 12, but I should make the point that, yeah, the subtitle of the book are 12 common sense questions to protect your wealth. Angie, there are no answers in this book. But there are some great questions that I believe firmly that every family business is different. Whether you're farming, retail, manufacturing, import, like there's so many differentiators from business to business to business, even firms in the same sector. But these 12 questions work across every industry. I believe that at the end of these 12 questions, there is nothing left for a mother and daughter, father and daughter, son, father, any combination of family member, generations. Some of these questions are directed to the controlling shareholder, mom and dad. And some of the questions are directed at the next generation. And what the questions are doing is probing whether or not there's a buyer in the house. Is there a buyer in that business? And if the answer comes back at the end of these 12 questions that you don't have a buyer in the house, then my goodness, does that not bring the clarity and the importance of at least being curious and cultivating other interested buyers, potential outside the family, key employees? Listen, stuff unfolds, life unfolds in interesting ways. And I think traditionally, when I was doing live events, I would often open up my keynote speech and say, in this room, there are kids who think their parents are going to give them the business for free, and parents who think the kids are going to buy it. And no one knows how to start the conversation. That's what this book does. It's just simply blame the author, blame the book. Someone can read the questions, because this is, I think, one of the most awkward conversations for parents and children to have. But I just think that the answers to these questions, the answer that is right for a family business, resides somewhere in the space between the parent and the child. And that's what these questions try to do, is to narrow that space, to bring clarity. And so just to give you a flavor of some of the questions, question number 2 would be, go to the controlling shareholder. And it says something like, are you prepared to sell this business, yes or no? Not kinda, or maybe, or I'll get back to you. It's asking someone to answer definitively, are you prepared to sell this business one day, yes or no? Do you know how many kids are sitting in businesses? And I say kids, or children, and it sounds like we're talking about 22-year-olds. There are children in their 40s and 50s who still do not have clarity around whether or not there will ever be an internal sale from their parents who are in their 70s or 80s. So just a reminder, when I say children, understand I'm meaning there is statistically some businesses with 3 generations in the business, because we are living vastly longer. Business owners are in their 80s and 90s in many cases. Statistically, we got grandchildren in the business as well, working shoulder to shoulder to shoulder. And no one is having these conversations around the transition of the equity. That's what I'm talking about in this book. It's not the management succession planning, starting the kids off in the warehouse, moving them into sales, moving them into admin. That is relatively straightforward and easy. I am talking about the transition of the one thing no one wants to talk about, and that's the control. That's the voting shares. And that's what this book is really zeroing in on. How is that going to happen? When is it going to happen? Is it going to happen a little bit at a time over a long period of time? Or will it be all or nothing? One day someone's got to cough up $3 million, $30 million. Like, I'm really trying to get families to understand that the sooner they start to transition those voting shares, the more likelihood that they're going to really have a really successful internal transition. But asking kids to come up with $3, $5, $15, $20 million, it's too much, and kids are overwhelmed. And why is this a problem? Because a lot of business owners did what my father did, grandfather did, and great-grandfather did. When they got into business, after a couple of years in business, they actually turned a profit. You know what they did with that profit? They didn't pull it out and buy a Cadillac. They took that profit and pumped it back into the business. They didn't do it for 1 year. They did it for 30 years. That's what business owners do. We finance our capital expansions with our profits. We finance our receivables and our inventories. We do this because we love that under-leveraged balance sheet. We love to look at that balance sheet and go, oh my gosh, this is how much I'm worth. It's like, oh no, you're not. You're worth what someone will pay for that business. And if you've built a business that is so reliant and dependent on you, that is not a sellable business. That is fantasy. And so I'm really trying to bring through, the book and the questions in the book, really bring into focus this idea that the questions not only answer the question who will buy the shares, but actually how to build a business that is sellable and valuable. Because every single business owner on this call today is going to need the proceeds from that business to fund what is going to be the most expensive retirement and longest retirement in the history of this planet. And going to the oldest page in the playbook, which is, I'll give you a hint, do nothing. Semi-retire, pull a salary while your kids run the business. It ain't working. It is not working because that business owner isn't having a heart attack at 73 and dying. He's having a heart attack at 73, getting a stent and running 3 marathons and going into his 80s and 90s. And the kids are in their 60s and 70s waiting for the conversation about when control, definitive control, voting shares are going to transition. Silence is the great destroyer of family business wealth. It is not family conversations, difficult family conversations around the transition of the equity. It's the silence around that one subject that is grinding on relationships and causing adult children to leave their parents' business at a complete frustration. It's got to stop. We can do better.
What's your favorite question? Which one is your favorite one?
I think it's question number 3 because it's right on the heels of my second favorite, which is, are you prepared to sell this business? Yes or no? And then question number 3 is, are you willing to risk your capital to purchase this business at full market value? Yes or no? So it's really like, boom, right at the very beginning of the process, you're really learning whether or not there is that passion. There's that passion for ownership. And then I would say my third favorite is actually question number 1. And it is a really benign, friendly, easy question. And the order of these questions is super important, by the way. Question number 1 is so friendly. It asks everyone in the room to answer the question, what's your business look like in 5 years? Can you imagine a next gen answering the question this way? Oh, I don't know. I think the business in 5 years will be, kind of bigger and stuff. Yeah. Do not proceed to question number 2. That is not the answer of an owner. That is maybe the answer of a very loyal, dedicated son or daughter or employee. You know how owners answer that question? Are you serious, mom and dad? You're asking me what the business looks like in 5 years? Oh man, I think it could be bigger. In fact, I hope it will be bigger, but it won't be bigger unless you continue to change. We need a bigger online presence. We need to launch a new brand. We need to get rid of that employee. We need to hire that employee. We need to get rid of this product line because it's got a negative gross margin. We need to do this. And on the surface, that looks like a complete disaster. That looks like 2 generations are going to be colliding, right? It looks like, oh my, when I see and hear different visions or different fundamental answers to question number 1, I am heartened. I am optimistic that there is a buyer in the house. Owners have their own ideas. If they don't, that is a casualty waiting to happen. That is going to be one of those 70% of firms that transition to the next generation and then blow themselves up. Because what they've been doing is chasing the wrong metric, chasing longevity, as opposed to transitioning to someone who loves that business and believes in their own talents and God-given gifts that they're going to actually risk their capital and buy that business for the right reasons because they think they can make money.
Yeah. So I'm sure walking through a lot of companies through these questions, you've probably heard many memorable answers to these or discussions that we could learn from. Any other examples?
Yeah, I remember doing a national radio phone-in show, and of course, when you do those types of events, you generate a lot of email traffic. I took a phone call the next day from what turned out to be a very, very wealthy business owner, and he said, "We're a family in transition," which is always code for we're buckling under stress and it's chaos. He said, "Could you help us out?" And I'm like, "Well, actually, I'm not a consultant, and by the way, I'm not. I'm a speaker, I'm an author. I really have written this book for consultants and educators and really financial advisors, insurance folk, people who are skilled at working with business owners to use these 12 questions to start conversations. Anyways, he was super persistent, this very, very, very wealthy business owner. And he says, look, if you're ever in downtown Toronto, could we meet? Turned out I was. We met. I was escorted to this incredible boardroom, oak panel boardroom, vaulted ceiling, just absolutely amazing. And in shuffles this old guy. He's hunched over and he comes in, he says, I read your book, and he starts telling me about the business. And I said, look, hang on, before you go much further, why don't you invite your son in and we can have this conversation together? And he looks at me and he goes, I am the son. My 95-year-old dad will be here shortly. And there you have it. That is what we're going to be seeing. Dad rolls in, literally in a wheelchair. It's a $1 billion company. And so there I have this 73-year-old junior and his 95-year-old father. And we agreed to go through the 12 questions. I go through the 12 questions. I ask Dad, who's got definitive voting control, whether or not he wants to sell the business. And he goes, no. I'm like, okay, no right or wrong. Seriously, there are no right or wrong answers. The real benefit of the questions are the clarity that they bring to the next generation. So the next generation, that was the first time he actually heard his father vocalize that he would never sell the business. So I said, okay, fine. I turned to Junior and I asked him question number 3. Are you willing to risk your capital, yes or no? He goes, yes. I go, this is crazy. I have no seller, but I actually have an ex-gen who wants to risk their capital by the business. So I go back to Dad and I say, look, I'm not asking you to change your answer. Could you just explain why you don't want to sell this business? And he goes, if I sold this business, I'd have nowhere to go. I love coming to the office. And then Junior pipes in and goes, well, hang on. If I bought this business from you, Dad, you could come here. And then, I mean, the lenders love you. You're the face of the company. You're the institutional knowledge. People love you. You've got this great vision. Of course you could come to the office. And then Dad goes, so if I sold, I could keep my same office? And these two are having this little sidebar conversation. I'm going, oh my God. So Dad changes his mind, goes, well, if I could keep coming into the office, yeah, sure, I'd entertain selling the business to him. And I thought to myself, how many tens of thousands of businesses are out there where there is a buyer in the house, where they just don't know how to start the conversation around the shares? Everyone's too afraid of the answer that they may hear. And I thought, I have just got to take this message on the road. That's 1,000-page speeches later, 26 countries. This problem that I'm talking about, this challenge around silence, around the transition of shares, it's everywhere. It's in the Philippines, it's in Guatemala, it's in Mexico and Canada and France and England and Kuala Lumpur. It is universal. Everyone is wedded to this idea that a business owner's greatest legacy is their business. And all they have to do is run it long enough and then die and then give it to someone via their estate. And that will be their greatest legacy. It is destroying families everywhere. Family wealth that has taken decades to build gets evaporated, not in years, but in weeks and months, when next gens are left fighting over the business, especially when it's done via a will or an estate that thrusts all sorts of siblings into business together as equal partners, even if some of them weren't even in the business. Like that and numerous other complexities caused by a lack of planning.
Yeah, and I think in the family business world, there's so much focus on succession and transition from the leadership perspective and who's going to run the company, but those conversations around equity and wealth aren't happening. And it's a little bit more of a challenging conversation. And especially when you're saying, hey, I'm not gifting this to you, you need to, but you get to a point, and maybe if you haven't had those conversations early enough, you get, they're not prepared to purchase, or I would have maybe 10 years ago, but maybe not now.
Yeah, and Angie, it's very interesting. It's usually at this point in my speech presentation where there are next gens going, oh my God, who invited this idiot? I mean, where am I going to come up? I thought I was going to get it for free. Like, how am I going to come up with I'm in my 40s, I'm in my 50s. Where am I going to come up with the money to buy my parents' business? God, I hope my father doesn't read this book or my mother doesn't read this book. Listen, I am not trying to deny the next generation anything. I love when families transition wealth to the next generation. So I'm a big proponent. I cover this really in my second book, but a big proponent of family meetings. As you know, living gifts of cash are tax-free in America. We can take $1,000, $10,000, $1 million, give it to our children while we're alive and follow this little technique. Let's take $10,000. We're in a family meeting with our advisors present. We say to our kids, here's a $10,000 gift. Your mother and I have taken $10,000 out of the company. We've taken it out as a salary, a bonus, a dividend, whatever, however we've taken it out, and we'd like to start to transition it to you. We have ample money to pay for our long-term care, so we are starting to transition our wealth. Oh, and by the way, kids, you can do anything you want with this money, but by the way, our family business is for sale. Now, would you like to return that $10,000 we just gave you? Don't say you don't have money. And buy $10,000 worth of voting shares? Yes or no? There's no right or wrong answer, but listen, follow the money. The money never lies. If those next gens really don't want to be owners, they'll tell you. They'll tell you with their decision around that money. It works. It works with $1,000, $10,000, $100,000, 1 million, 10 million. The amount is actually irrelevant. Follow the money.
Yeah, that's always the answer, by the way. Follow the dollar. If you don't know why, follow the dollar. So could you share then just 3 things that every business owner should do like after this webinar? Like what are their 3 next steps that they need to do?
Well, they absolutely should read the book. It is a, look, this is the world did not need another academic book on this subject where business owners dive into it, start reading it, and just toss it. Like, this is a book about 2 people on a plane on their way to Barbados. They sit down beside a chance encounter. They get into the scotch. They start talking and confessing. One's an old guy, one's a young guy. And the young guy, okay, his name is William. I did a terrible job hiding myself in the narrative. And William shares 12 questions that his family used to help lead to the sale of their business. They're on their way to Barbados. Both have sold their business, these old guy and young guy. And it is an easy book to read, but with profoundly challenging and important business wisdom in the book. So read the book. And then sit down with your children inside the business and outside the business, and ask them these 12 questions. You'll cover a lot of ground. Your family may actually feel relief, often for the first time, maybe in a long time, around how this big asset, often your biggest asset, is going to transition. And then work with your advisors to start to implement these plans. Most business owners are underinsured, right? Most of them are. Right? So business owner, guys, statistically we die. We predecease our wives, our spouses, our partners. The shares will often transition to a surviving spouse. Hey, Angie, I get more phone calls from elderly women whose business owner husbands have predeceased them. And you know what they tell me? They want to bring their husband back from the dead and kill them themselves. They don't want these businesses. They've got this business and now they got to figure out how to run it. They don't know the lenders. They don't know the employees. Often the key employees have left when the principal controlling shareholder has died or become incapacitated because they're worried. There's been no discussion of succession plans. So when I talk about really wealth destruction happening very quickly, that's often what's happening. Lenders get nervous, key employees get nervous, suppliers get nervous. And so it's heartbreaking when business owners in their 30s or 40s don't anticipate stuff happening and there's been no discussion. So really the book, read the book, do the 12 questions, work with your advisors, make sure you have proper liquidity to help fund the transition of your businesses. And I think that'll keep you busy. And I'm going to add a 4th thing. It's something I cover in greater detail in my other book. And that is, for goodness sakes, get a will, spend $500, spend $1,000. If you don't, you will cost your family untold hundreds of thousands of dollars in grief, legal fees, time to administer your estate, chaos, emotional anxiety. I could go on for quite some time. Spend $500, spend $1,000, and answer the question, if I'm not here, where will my business go?
Yeah, so that's great. So read the book, talk to your children, or if you're next gen on this call, talk to your parents, gift them the book. You know, everyone who is a part of this does get a free copy of your book, courtesy of Skylight. I'll get into that a little bit later. So you'll get a copy of the book, read it, share it with your parents, share it with your children, talk to your advisors, get a will. I love it. Great. And I did say, as I was reading the book, I'm like, I think Tom is William. And I wonder if you was that a real conversation that you had, or part of it, or?
So John on the plane, the old guy he sits down beside, really represents an amalgam of every broken, dysfunctional family friend that I've known, or colleague or associate. Like, we all have collected stories of broken family businesses, right? If we think long and hard, they're all the way through our communities. And in many cases, they're so public. They are like the thing that we try to avoid, which is a public airing of family breakdown, is actually often we get the families that we fear, not the ones that we design through proper facilitation and planning and conversation. It's that family that just waits too long and buckles under the stress of the silence around the shifting of control.
Yeah, that's true. So, all right. Well, thank you. That is my questions. That's all of my questions. But before I open it up, I do have some audience questions here. And before I open that up, I wanted to let you know that Skylight Financial Group has graciously purchased a copy of Every Family's Business for each webinar participant. Like I said, I'm a big fan. I read through it. It was fantastic. Emily will send out an email after this webinar with instructions on how to get your copy. So please make sure you watch for that. I believe it comes from UT Family Business Center email or from Emily. Make sure that you watch for that and then follow the instructions on how to get your book, your copy. If you're online and not a member of the center, but would like to learn more about joining the center, you can reply to that same email and Kirsten will reach out to set up an appointment with you. And everyone, please follow us on social media. We appreciate the likes, the shares, the tags, the comments. It helps get the word out about the center and all the things that we do and how we can impact the regional family business community. So Kirsten will put all of our links in the chat box, so you can just click on all of those and make sure you stay connected. So now we're going to get into the audience questions. Okay, so the first one. So you've given a lot to think about, and you just mentioned in your last answer, one of the things is to talk to your consultants. So is this kind of a do-it-yourself process, or do advisors play an active role?
Listen, I think, building a fence on the weekend, great do-it-yourself project. Business succession planning, I think you could not invent a more complicated and emotional subject. And I think business owners who try to do it by themselves because they're seeking privacy, they're worried about the public airing of maybe difficult conversation. Listen, it won't work. There are so many moving parts with the transition of a family business. There's tax issues, legal structure considerations, there's family dynamics, there's the value system of the family, which is all about, everyone getting the same size, steak at the barbecue versus, right, versus a business, which is a meritocracy. It's like no one's getting the same size steak. It's like the guy with control gets the biggest steak, right? And it's about competency and work and great decisions. I mean, they're two different worlds that are trying to make sense of each other. And so trying that on your own, navigating a succession plan on your own is just one of the biggest recipes for disaster. Use a third party, a trusted advisor. If you're a member of the center, you've already taken the important first step in reaching out and getting proper resources and education. I know you've got a great list of folks in your community who do this. They do this all day long, right? They've seen the good, the bad, the ugly. I mean, why do we have to reinvent the world? So I would say absolutely not do it yourself. Reach out, look for fit, just like you would hire an accountant or a lawyer. Look for someone you feel comfortable having, a really challenging conversation with. Then hire them, and then move forward. Whether you think your exit is a long way away or around the corner, boy, stuff happens every day to businesses. If you're prepared for this, you're going to be in great shape. You'll never forget this webinar.
Do you know what percentage of owners that gift their companies to their kids succeed?
There is no hard data on that. All I can tell you is just from the 1,000 events that I've done over the last 12 years and the emails and the comments I've received from readers, it's well over 80%. 80% of that 70%, right? 70% transition, right? And only 30% succeed. And the vast majority have been gifted. Yeah.
So what the division of a family business can be a complex emotional issue. So is fair equal or is equal fair? I love this question.
Yeah, it's the trickiest of all the questions. I think there is a third option, is equal equal. In other words, if you go back to that scenario where I described the family meeting with all the siblings in the room with the advisor present. By the way, with the advisor present in the family meeting, everyone behaves. There's some gravitas. There's an agenda. There's someone taking minutes. There's structure. And this is often lacking in family business transition. So that family meeting where everyone's present, hearing the same question, the same answers at the same time, is the real value of this approach to business succession planning. But I just think that little maneuver that I described where we transition an equal amount of cash to all of our children, inside or outside the business, and then ask them if they want to buy the business. Everyone is given the opportunity to exercise control over their own gifted wealth. So while I don't like gifting businesses, I'm all about gifting wealth and then asking people to buy that business the old-fashioned way, based on a third-party valuation of the business. No haircuts, no discounts for kids. If we start taking shortcuts, then we're going to start dangling an economic incentive in front of our children and get the answer that we want, not the answer that is necessarily right for them. So we may actually be creating an economic incentive to entice a child outside the business to return that money and become a shareholder, even though they have no interest or passion or desire for that business. That third-party valuation is crucial in that little maneuver that I described.
Could you talk a little bit about the logistics of having the conversations about these 12 questions? Is it an all-day thing, a half-day, off-site, on-site? Is it just family members that should be involved and your trusted advisors or consultants?
I would say in the early days, that's a great question. In the early days, I would say the very first family meeting should just be family with your trusted advisor. And I really wouldn't complicate it by having spouses of your adult children, but as quickly as you can expand to include them, I would. Otherwise, their exclusion is kind of a commentary on the lack of trust. They're going to get a version of what happened in the meeting anyway. Better to build a bigger tent in the fullness of time, like strive for that goal, but start small and keep the agenda small and keep the agenda relatively achievable. So like, I believe a really great first meeting agenda would have mom and dad, 2 kids, siblings, and tackle one issue: the selection of an executor. In the event that business owner dies, here's my will. Let's have a conversation about who the executor should be. So it's not going to be some great big surprise. Surprise, it's you, but not your brother. Like how is that going to lead to a proper business succession transition? And by the way, not just a will, but that financial power of attorney. If a business owner ends up on a ventilator, tell me, if there's no power of attorney, financial power of attorney, who has the legal authority to write checks and keep the business going? No will, no power. I don't know anyone who's got a financial power of attorney who doesn't have a will. We go in for the will, we come out with the financial power of attorney and the healthcare directive. So again, if you wanted to add to that, things that they should do after this webinar, yeah, will, power of attorney, healthcare directive, 3 documents, absolutely crucial for every business owner. Mostly more important for business owners than anyone else on the planet.
And how often, a question came in, how often should they be having these conversations, going through these 12 questions?
So here's what happens. A lot of families are, they're very fearful of these meetings. They think if we bring our family together to talk about money, that's like a recipe for disaster. Like, I don't know. Let's just hope it goes really, really well if we don't meet. Here's what happens. They have a meeting with their advisor present, and guess what? It's a short agenda. It actually goes pretty well. And then people get excited. People get excited and they go, we were going to have these once a year. Let's have them once a quarter for the first year or two until we get things really structured. I am 58 years old. I've been to 53 consecutive family meetings. We get together now and we are spending about 80% of our time on philanthropy. We have all of our documentation up to date. We have our business succession plans clearly articulated and revisited and updated and shared. Lots of transparency, no secrets. I don't know how secrets lead to great, successful dynastic families. Lots of people think it does, but I don't get it. So we share our documents. So our governance is pretty much under control. We're always tweaking and updating, but we're spending the vast majority of our annual family meeting on family talking about how we want to transition our wealth and sharing it with our community.
So have you seen an instance, or can you speak to maybe an example where you have multiple people in the next generation, maybe, multiple children, and maybe the one that has the willingness and the capacity to buy into the business is not the right one to run the business, and maybe the one that doesn't have the capacity to, that's the person that you really feel in your heart or in the future is the right person to run and own the business?
Right. I have seen that scenario, and that really is a judgment on the basis of the seller. And it is a little bit like trying to run an estate from the grave, right? It's like when a business owner says to a third-party buyer, like a competitor, I will sell you my business for this price, but you have to promise me to keep my kids employed or keep this key employee or keep this and do this and do. Listen, after you sell that business, it's none of your business because it's not your business. So part of my answer is if someone is willing to risk their capital, what they're also purchasing is the ability to appoint themselves as president or whatever position they want. Like, in other words, this is the hardest part of my message, is that a business is not a legacy. It's a really hard message to deliver. It's so counterintuitive. And I can often make this point in a live event by asking this question. Here it is. Angie, who was the founder of Coca-Cola? I don't know either. I've asked that question more than 500 times. I keep forgetting to Google it. I can be in front of a live audience with 500,000 people, ask that question, and you know what I get back? Crickets. The third most valuable consumer brand in the world, and no one knows who started it, and no one cares. It is a little bit of a dramatic way to make the point for founders who might be running an auto dealership or a funeral home or a restaurant or some manufacturing business. Look, I am not being critical of you. I am trying to bring another perspective that your business, seriously, people don't remember founders. It's not, your legacy is not your business, it's your family. It's your relationships. It's the children that you impart knowledge on how to start businesses, grow businesses. It's the knowledge that they take forward and share with their children and their children's children and their children's children. That is your perpetual legacy. It is not a building with your name on it. I love driving through old towns and looking at the brick walls of the main street of old towns, and you can see the remnants of a store that, right? We all have those iconic pictures, and you often can discern 2 or 3 company names that were painted on a brick wall that are just faded in time. It is a really, really hard message to deliver, that businesses just don't last. And that's not a visceral or a gut kind of feeling that I share. It's data. Of the 100 largest firms in America in the year 1900, that's like 121 years ago. Do you know that only 16 were still in business in the year 2000? After 100 years, 4 generations, 16 of America's 100 largest firms were still in business. No one wants to talk about how frail and temporary and fragile businesses are, and they are, especially over time. And we all are, I just think so much of the literature, family business literature, has got people hooked onto this idea that if they don't get their business into the next generation and the next generation and the next generation, even into the hands of the unborn, that somehow you failed, you're a loser family. And I just believe it can be a toxic message, that there is another way of measuring success. And it's the old-fashioned way. And it's called dollars and cents. And sometimes selling a business, you know my story, tire distribution, chemical manufacturing, plastic manufacturing, publishing company. I have 2 kids, 28, 26. Angie, I've asked both our kids if they want to buy my business. We've transitioned cash so that they can buy the business at full market value. Guess what? They don't want it. They're going to take their cash and start businesses that they're passionate about. It is statistically unlikely that the next generation will share the exact same dream and ambition as their parents. Do you know that if Henry Ford did what his father did, we'd never have the Ford Motor Company? His father was a farmer. Is that a failed farm transition? Or is that a business succession plan that was done so well that it released the potential in the next generation to go off and do something spectacular? Steve Jobs' father ran a restaurant. We'd never have Apple. Bill Gates' father was a lawyer. We'd never have Microsoft. There are countless examples of giving the next generation permission to go off with our full support and endorsement and access to family money to go off and pursue their dreams that they're passionate about. That is a family business succession story that I'd love to write.
Yeah, I think it's that old school way of thinking generations ago that if I didn't transition my business to my kids, then I'm a failure, right? And it's that new that's transitioning to your kids. That's not the only way you define success. You know, maybe for some it does, but there's other ways that you can define success, and certainly selling it is one. I think we have time for one more questions. One came through. How important is business valuation method, and what time should valuation be done, and how often should it be done?
Well, I think it absolutely should be done annually. In other words, and this is again not a do-it-yourselfer. There's a lot of people who will go online. They'll like find online resources to value your business. Look, the valuation is at the starting point of the business succession plan. Unless you have a defensible third-party valuation method that is looking at a number of different values. They have different formulas. In many cases, they'll average those different formulas to come up with fair market value. But whatever the methodology is, look for someone who's has the proper credentials, accounting credentials to do proper valuations. It's not something you kind of play with or play around with. But once you've got that defensible third-party valuation, you can have these conversations with internal buyers. Maybe you've got key employees who want to buy the business. Maybe you've got a child inside the business, a child outside the business. When the child outside the business sees that the child inside the business is paying full market value, watch your family flourish, because the amount of jealousy, kids outside the business think that the child in the business has got to jump on the money. They've got a front row seat. They're going to get something more or faster than someone who sits outside the business. And of course, that could be the furthest idea from mom and dad's plan. But that is what silence leads to, that assumption making. The third-party valuation gets rid of all that nonsense. When mom and dad can hold up, this is a third-party report on the value of this business. It also will give business owners a really sobering idea of what their business is worth. There are a lot of business guys, yeah, my business is worth $2 million. It's like, really? It's actually worth $6 million. With a competitive bid process, with multiple buyers, even international buyers, your business could be worth triple weight. Or guess what, dude? It's actually worth $500,000. You are wildly off the mark. There's a lot of businesses that have no idea. They just pull numbers out of the air. Like that third-party valuation brings people right to earth so they can think clearly about who and the timing around their exit. But doing nothing, dying at your desk, leaving other family members to clean up your mess, you will be remembered. Just not fondly.
This is true. So I think this was fabulous. That brings us up to our hour. So I wanted to say thank you again, Tom, for your time and your expertise. This was packed with so much great information. The book is packed with a lot of great information. We did record this webinar. Emily will include the link in the email that you get. So if you want to go back and rewatch something or share it with someone who maybe wasn't able to log on, you can absolutely do that. Thank you to Skylight Financial Group for sharing this opportunity with us and introducing us and making the connection with Tom, and for purchasing the books. So again, another reminder, watch for that email to find out how you can get your book. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the rest of our sponsors, without whom we couldn't provide services and resources that we do. Skylight Financial Group, Huntington National Bank, Shoemaker, Loop, and Kendrick. Those three have been sponsors with us since day one, 29 years. And then we have Eastman and Smith, the William Vaughn Company, Fifth Third Bank, Highland, and Raymond. So we thank you for all of your support. Thank you everyone for joining us and all the wonderful questions. So everyone have a great day.